Wahala. Guys, Hurricane Mashele is back, reminding South Africa not to be delusional, to expect the ANC to come back. He actually also reminds South Africa not to be delusional about this GNU government, actually with facts proving how it is that the GNU is unable to function and why it is indeed paralyzed. With the contradictions in ideology between the ANC and the DA, we're actually seeing it all play out now with, remember my last video with Marco Rubio actually explaining why USAID in South Africa would have to be cut, and then Mantashe, Minister of Mineral Resources, actually thinks that he would hold back resources for the USA. But then we know that the DA has actually been pro-West. And so the DA and the ANC coming into an agreement, which many people actually argue is actually nothing but a grand coalition between the ANC and the DA. That's this GNU. But Prince Mashele here is actually arguing really bold statements that actually, for me, sometimes when I listen to the video, really academic, but I just want to stand up on my chair, get out of my chair and just almost run away. He actually makes statements like, that we should stop this delusion of the GNU, the Government of National Unity, which tried to bring collective governance together with at least 10 parties as I can remember. He actually also praises the GNU as almost what seems to be like a cosmetic. He actually argues that the GNU is actually a cosmetic shock absorber for now, for the short period of time, to prop up what he feels is a failure of ANC and the technical incompetence of the ANC. He actually also goes on to really slam the MK party in this video, really powerful video, that the MK party is actually simply a collection of state capture forces, and that the MK party really isn't included in the future of South Africa. Really, this video, I really would wish that you guys watch till the end. It's shocking, and I really don't know. I'll still be making a series of video, because this particular podcast he made with Sizwe Mpofu Welch is one of the most academic podcasts ever that I think Mashele has actually made, and I really admonish you guys to watch today. And he actually explains how ZANU PF went mad. We saw what Gwede Mantashe is actually trying to propose now, that South Africa would hold onto its minerals to the US, and probably other investors could come in, probably investors from Germany, investors from China, to come and mine, since the USA has just cut off the US aid that it actually gives to South Africa completely. But Prince Mashele here argues on how the ZANU PF went mad with this kind of policy, and how Zimbabwe, went into what it is today, with Gaten McKenzie reminding us in the last video how Zimbabwe started calling back the white farmers, which it took farmers from them. That's according to Gaten McKenzie. But Prince Mashele tries to really break down for us in this video how ZANU PF went mad, and Zimbabwe had to pay for that, and trying to push that South Africa doesn't go down to that lane, because he argues on how the GNU was South Africa's way to escape an economic disaster from what he thinks would have been a disaster if the MK, EFF and ANC had come into a coalition. Really interesting but really potent arguments he makes here. He actually also argues that South Africa, as I mentioned earlier, needs a technical revolution, and that that the GNU is actually still what South Africa could actually manage to prop up for now, but it's just a cosmetic kind of like shock absorber, so to speak, and all of that. So let's quickly listen to Prince Mashele really break down this argument. And if you're a lover of South Africa, you love South Africa, I think this discussion is a really timely one for us to really slowly start getting into that consciousness where we are preparing for how probably the next elections. I hear that there's a 2026 elections, I think municipal or provincial elections, and then the 29. Because this channel, I really want to really get Kwazemi here to be a source of education, to hopefully get people to really, think through their voting patterns. And also, we're going to soon we're going to become an academy, what we call a campus. So there'll be tutorials in my memberships. So if you really are getting ready for my YouTube launch and my courses and all that, you better start considering to become a member. I'll be setting up the parameters on how to join the membership and the payments and all that, so you can really get a hinge of what is to come in terms of training, skills acquisition and all that. Because the way South Africa is going, every African needs to get their hands on a skill, and I'll be offering one of the skills I know best, which is content creation and YouTube. But anyway, let's quickly listen to Prince Mashele break down these arguments on why he thinks that the GNU is actually a cosmetic shock absorber, why he thinks that we shouldn't be deluded, that the GNU is only a delusion, and share your thoughts.
The coalition government that we have is probably the biggest thing that happened last year on the political scene after the election. What do you make of the decision to form this government? And do you think it was a wise decision on the part, let's say, of the ANC first?
Yeah, look, I have said it when this thing... Firstly, I predicted that there would be an ANC government coalition after the elections, and people thought I had smoked marijuana, and it happened. Secondly, when it was formed, I said, this is the best thing under the circumstances.
Sure.
Because I looked at all the possible scenarios and I saw doomsday. So I maintain my position. It's a coalition government between the DA and the ANC. This government of national unity nonsense is propaganda by Cyril Ramaphosa and them.
Sure.
It's a coalition government between the ANC and the DA. Under the circumstances, I repeat it, it is the best thing under the circumstances. Why? Let's lay down the scenarios on the table. Scenario number one is the ANC and the MK.
Yeah.
Because remember, the ANC was the biggest party after the elections, 40%.
Yeah.
And then the MK was the third biggest party, 14%. So if you had skipped the DA, the ANC and the MK could possibly have formed a coalition government.
Sure.
But there are two complications, by the way, with regard to that. One is a technical complication. The second one is a moral complication.
Right.
Let's start with the technical complication. The MK party at the time didn't recognize the results of the elections. And people forget this, by the way. The MK party said the elections had been rigged and it was running to court to challenge the elections. How do you form a coalition government with a party that says the elections have been rigged and we are going to court to challenge them? It's impossible. And people forget this part. So that scenario was out of the picture. The second aspect is the moral complication. You see, and here people can lynch me if they want, but I'll tell you what I think anyway.
Please, by all means.
The MK party is actually a collection of state capture forces. If you look at all of the prominent people who appeared before the Zondo Commission, accused of state capture. And by the way, there are tons and tons of evidence that during state capture, money was stolen from the state, number one. Number two, state-owned enterprises were actually collapsed. This is not some opinion. It's concrete evidence. Most of those figures who were in charge of state-owned enterprises, whether Brian Mulife, Montana, and all of them. So all of those characters have flocked in the direction of MK. So if you say, including Jacob Zuma himself, because he was the chief of state capture, by the way, working with the Guptas. I mean, the Guptas did what they did because of their proximity to Jacob Zuma. Full stop. There's no debate about it. They would never have done that if they didn't have the kind of access that they had to Jacob Zuma. So how do you form a coalition government with such forces, especially if, as the ANC, you are sending a message to society that you are renewing yourself. So that was a moral complication. So that's the first scenario. The second scenario, and the DA would be the third scenario,
Sure.
would have been the ANC, the EFF, and others. Because the ANC and the EFF alone would not have been able to form a coalition government. The numbers would not have been sufficient.
Yeah.
So it would have been the ANC, EFF, and others. Even the EFF would have been problematic morally, by the way. Why? Remember that at the time, stories had circulated linking the leadership of the EFF to corruption. VBS, for example, there was a report that came out. There was a confession by Matodzi, and so on and so forth. So to form a coalition with such a bunch of people who are accused of serious corruption morally would have been difficult for society to embrace. So that also would have been a problem. But also there was, with regard to the EFF, ANC and others, there was also a technical problem. The technical problem would have been, if the EFF had been brought into government, there would have been an economic crisis in South Africa. The investors most probably would have pulled out their money. You can decide in the comfort of your armchair to say, to hell with investors, let them pull out their money. You can say so. But let me tell you, in the real world, what happens when investors pull out their money? They leave a trail of misery and agony, not for the elite, but for ordinary people. This to hell with investors story, we've seen it in Africa, by the way. Don't go far. Go to Zim. The ZANU-PF leadership at some point went mad, and they said to hell with investors. The elite haven't suffered the consequences, but ordinary people have suffered the consequences of disinvestment from Zim. Zimbabweans have scattered all over the world. So there was a real question in front of the ANC, Ramaphosa and them, and say, do we want misery and agony to befall our own people? If they had bitten the bullet and said we are going to go with the EFF, millions of South Africans now would be suffering. Even the middle class, by the way, would actually suffer. There would have been hyperinflation and all the consequences that would flow from that. So those are the scenarios. So the DA and the ANC, so far, it has not been a great marriage, but they have stabilized things a little bit. So no hyperinflation. Investors haven't pulled out of South Africa en masse. There's a bit of load shedding. It's not there. There is a bit of positive sentiment on the part of South Africans.
Yeah, quite a lot.
Yeah. So I think that if you are a rational observer, unless if you are mad, you can't run away from the fact that at least this coalition between the ANC and the DA has been a shock absorber. It has not propelled South Africa to greater heights, and I don't think that will happen because the damage that the ANC has done over the past 30 years is so massive that it will take a serious technical revolution to fix.